Joining us now is former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Negroponte. Ambassador, this comes just a day after Angela Merkel stressed the importance of the transatlantic alliance. Is this walking back in reaction to President Trump's visit, you think, and maybe an effort to gain support in an election year?
I mean, it's hard to say. It's disturbing. There's no question about it. I think it was one of the less successful elements of his trip abroad as compared to his stops in the Middle East. I think it was discouraging, the body language and everything else. The relationship with Europe and the NATO alliance, as far as I'm concerned, is core. It's a fundamental aspect of our foreign policy, and I think we're in a slightly treacherous territory here because I'm concerned that this kind of weakening of our resolve on our part could tempt Mr. Putin to take advantage of the situation in various ways.
Well, the weakening of our resolve, certainly it didn't begin with President Trump. You look at our position on the world stage under President Obama, Ambassador, and that was his foreign policy, was to remove the United States from critical situations and relationships. Right.
Well, yeah, I'm talking, though, about the firmness of our commitment to NATO, and I think that just needs to be reaffirmed. The National Security Advisor said it was implicit in the whole visit, and General Mattis has reaffirmed it, and so has Mr. Tillerson. But I think it's important that it come all the way from the top, so that's of concern. Now, if Mrs. Merkel, she said we can't count fully on the United States. If by that she meant we have to do more for ourselves, I think you could find a silver lining in that language. But I just hope that something is done in the weeks and months ahead to reaffirm this alliance at the highest level and not just focus on the question of payments and burden sharing. That's an important element, but I think there's got to be an equality of emphasis on both the burden sharing on one hand and the commitment to European security on the other.
Ambassador, two quick questions. One is, when the leader of Germany says that Europeans have to do more to take care of themselves, isn't that exactly what President Trump is talking about? Isn't he saying that he wants Europe to do more to take care of itself with regards to NATO? That's one. Two, the president could be making a decision this week on whether on potentially pulling out of the Paris climate deal. How does that affect our relationship with Europe?
Correct. Yeah, no, and I think your first point goes to what I was saying. There could be a silver lining here, and it may be that they got the message and they are going to do more for themselves. I just don't want some distance to develop between the two sides of the Atlantic here. This has been the core alliance, the core relationship for the United States for more than a century now. The Paris Accords, I think, is an important point, because if after all is said and done, the president finds a way to stay connected, for the United States to stay connected to the Paris Accords, I think that'll be very welcome in Europe, and that could add a new dimension and a new perspective to the whole meeting.
I'm not sure, Ambassador, that everyone would read Angela Merkel's comments exactly the same as has been reported in the press generally. I mean, the context is that Trump was saying, pay your fair share. That doesn't sound like any kind of withdrawal of support for NATO or our commitment to the military purpose of NATO, but simply a recognition that Germany is not the country it was when NATO was first created. And doesn't Angela Merkel's comments actually more reflect her political reality, as well as a recognition that she's encountered a president of the United States who didn't speak diplomat, who just spoke frankly about what was expected and sounded like she was accepting that?
It could be, but on the other hand, I think there has been concern, one that I share, that the commitment to Article 5 of the NATO Charter, an attack on one is an attack on all, was not reaffirmed during the course of the summit, and I think that was a disappointment.
Meantime, newly elected French President Macron met with Russian President Putin in France yesterday. Macron saying it was an extremely frank meeting after attacking two state-funded Russian media outlets at a joint press conference with Putin. Still, the two reportedly set aside their differences, agreeing that the collapse of Syria is not an option. Ambassador, what do you make of this meeting? And that, again, it's like big boy posturing between Macron, Putin, and even Donald Trump with that white-knuckled handshake.
Well, yeah, but I do think that the French and the other Europeans are still concerned about Russian behavior. They're concerned about what's happened in the Ukraine. There doesn't seem to be any softening in that regard. Of course, they have long experience in dealing with their neighbor Russia, and they've got to manage that. In the context of this recent summit, yeah, it's a little bit of posturing, the fact that he meets with Mr. Putin just after the summit. But, you know, life goes on.
You know, one of the things that I struggle with is there's so much criticism right now about Donald Trump standing up for America and saying, you know, he's putting America first, which is what his promise was all throughout the campaign. It's what his messaging has been. And yet everybody seems surprised that this is what he's doing when he goes over and talks to NATO, when he goes over and talks to European leaders. Should we be surprised, and should we expect to see this going forward? Because that's what he said he was going to do.
Right, but a lot depends on how you define America first. We all want to put America first. That's our, and certainly somebody who's been a diplomat for 44 years on behalf of our country would want to do that. But the question is how you go about doing it. We're not alone in this world. We're only 5% of the global population. There are a lot of adversarial forces arrayed against us around the world. We need friends, and the core friendship that we've had over these past 70 years has been with NATO, which is 27, 28 countries, plus Japan and South Korea and Australia, of course, out there in the Pacific region. But these are the core relationships that we've got. And then there's the whole rest of the world, the rising powers, Russia, China, and so forth. So if we don't have our core relationships in good order, and I do think there's some uncertainty surrounding them at the moment, that could cause difficulty for the entirety of our foreign policy and national security. That's all I'm saying.
John.
I think there's a little definition that's needed here, and I think it's going to shake out over time, shake down over time.
Ambassador, it was great to see you. Thank you so much for the insight. Ambassador John Negroponte, take care.
Thank you.